Well, this old girl, shouldn't call her old, she's wonderful. This yellow girl has been ours for 10 years, never had an issue of consequence. Yes, I've beaten her up a little and had to fix a few things that have quit that have all been easy. So this is the first real issue that I've ever had, and it's not that big of a deal, but it's driving me a little nuts. So she's a 97 315BL for anyone that has a similar problem, and all of a sudden two things failed at the same time, or at least I'm currently of the belief that these two issues are not related to each other. Throttle will not come off idle. Electronic throttle control is not working. The complication comes from the fact that there is what they call a backup switch. It should really be called a bypass switch that shuts off, that is down the back of the right hand armrest. It's not right now because I've had to separate it in order to get to it and to the wiring. It's normally mounted the other way up and is at the back of the armrest here. But that right-hand switch of those two is what they call the backup switch, and the left-hand one is the instant switch. When you switch that switch, it bypasses the engine management computer, and therefore the issue you're solving becomes far simpler, because there's no computer wanting 1,000 inputs to do the right thing. This disconnects the ECM and allows you to throttle up and down on the toggle switch that is next to this main switch. So for a moment I was excited, flipped the switch, nothing happened. Right, so having checked 1,000 wires and 1,000 voltages in various locations, I've discovered that there may simply be a failed throttle servo motor. The reason for this video is that was my first conclusion, but every CAT specialist persuaded me otherwise and has had me running around checking out 1,000 different wires. So problem number one is electronic throttle control does not work. My next step on that is to disassemble a little bit more of the machine, and I now have the pinout for the throttle servo motor, so I'll be able to check to see if it's getting the signal that it's supposed to be getting. Once I can get it working on the backup circuitry, I can then tackle what, if any, issue is left with the computer-based circuitry. The second issue of the swing not releasing appears to be entirely separate. There is a swing release solenoid that locks out the swing hydraulically. That's right at the front of the swing motor next to the dipstick, right there in the middle of the field of view. Two wires that come to it from the cab. One, of course, is ground, the other is power. While power is on the solenoid, it opens and allows the swing motor to operate. One end of that wire is on pin number 6 at the back of this backup switch. I have voltage. At the other end of the solenoid, I have none. So simple fix: find the wire, find the brake, or simply replace the feed, and everything's good, right? So that sounds awesome. That is my next step, and you will see the video continue with whether or not I've managed to fix it. But swing motor release solenoid is the almost always cause of the machine not swinging. And then the second issue that I believe is that the throttle governor assembly that is down here at the back of the engine, down in the dark. I've got to take the pin off it and pin it out and figure out what the heck's wrong. Mechanically, there's nothing wrong. The servo motor is simply not rotating because it's not getting the signal to tell it to rotate. Either that or it has no power. Either which I will check in a moment and see if that is the cause. So 2 simple problems. I've been on it for 4 days, mostly because every expert I talk to has told me something completely different and has had me on a wild goose chase. So this video has got nothing to do with geese, and it is the video that dispels the need for chasing them around. I'll be back in a second with what I found with this swing release. First, it's the simplest thing to fix, so I'm going to focus on that as quickly as I can. Yes, I know I said a moment ago that I was going to ignore any ECM related issues. But since I was at the dealer getting other things, I did get a new pressure switch, since when you're in automatic ECM mode, the swing will not release unless you have hydraulic pressure on the swing part of the valve bank. So to do it, it's so trivial, I figured I would just do it anyway. So here's the valve bank, obviously in the center of the machine. Take the top cover off so you can physically get to it a lot easier. There are 2 pressure switches on the swing. So follow the hoses. Those are the hoses that come from the swing motor. They come straight here to the middle of the valve bank. There are 2 pressure switches, 1 and 2. In my case, the right hand one has been replaced before, left hand one has not, so I bought 1, and I will just unscrew it, at the base. Easy to do. Unplug it, plug in the new one. So at least one of those problems is fixed when I get further along with this diagnosis. There seems to be only 2 things that the ECM is looking for in order to swing. One is the requirement to swing, hydraulic demand, and then secondly the pressure at the swing valve body. So 2 pressure switches, they are identical, they're the same part, and I'm still not sure why there's 2, but there's 2. One's been replaced, I'm now replacing the other one. So next small part of the problem solved, perhaps. Look at that nasty old 1st generation pressure switch with brittle wires that are cracking as you bend them. And of course, brand new, beautiful, flexible wiring on the new type of pressure switch. So I'll screw the new one in and I'll be done with that part of it, at least, in just a second. Alright, at least I now have 2 of the modern type pressure switches that are installed. And that will make no difference, but easy to take away one of the possible causes of this. I'm partway there, so the swing release issue is fixed. The fix was very simple and had clearly been fixed before, so I fixed the fix. So what I've had to do is reuse the ground over here on the side of the tank that the previous owner had jerry-rigged. The 2 original wires, power and ground, are there tied up out of the way. The ground seems to be good on that pair of wires, but for the sake of a definitive clear ground, I wanted to come up here on this wire here on the tank. And then I've had to run a new wire inside through that breather hole. None of this moves, so this is all okay. I'll still wire tie it neatly out of the way in just a few minutes. The other end of that release power supply is through the hole down the back of the armrest. So through the breather hole around the back of that panel that I'll put back on over there in just a second. This wire will tuck in down there and be tied out of the way. It comes into the armrest at the back, down with all the other wires, and is spliced into the green wire that comes off the back of the backup switch, which is designated K906. So this is the switched 24 volt supply to the release solenoid when you're in backup mode. So at least that's working. And I believe that's also the power that goes when you're not in backup mode for the ECM as well. But we will solve that problem later. So at least backup mode now, the solenoid is releasing and it has a dedicated wire that goes to it. So far so good. Next I'm going to pull the wire off the back of the throttle solenoid, servo motor I mean, and check the pins for power. Again in backup mode. So if I can get it all working in backup mode, I have a possibility of it working in ECM with the ECM on. What I have not tried, which I think I will just now, is to power it up with the ECM and see if the... So the good news is the swing release is fixed in both backup mode and ECM mode. That same cable, K906, provides power under both modes, so that's good. But I've had to dig deeper to figure out the pinout for the cable that goes to the throttle servo motor. And I'm finding a lot of information, but I'm not finding hardly any of it to be particularly useful, right? It almost tells you what you need, but doesn't. And I don't know how the field service guys put up with this, because there are many things that are missing. First issue is that the wiring schematic is not a diagram or a drawing, it's only a schematic. And whilst there are references to things on the representation of the excavator, there's no actual sort of diagram that allows you to follow, like a drawing of a cab over here, for example, and, you know, left-hand control and right-hand control, or something that physically aligns with the machine would make it a lot easier. But I've managed to determine many things by guesswork. When you look at the service book, it refers to the whole system as electrical and starting system, and contains many, many useful things in order to give you the part number so you can buy them, but no actual information to help you diagnose. Also, the wiring schematics are like this, and they are of virtually no use when you're trying to figure out things on the actual machine. So what I've had to do, of course, is work from 3 different sources, and as the best that I can determine, I have a 6-pin connector that looks like this, that goes to the throttle control. According to the information I have, it's labeled pin 1, pin 2, pin 3, 4, 5, and 6. There are 6 pins. Pin 1 is supposed to be battery plus, which is permanently powered. Pin 2 is ground. Pin 3 is the feedback wire that goes back to the ECM. Pin 4 and pin 5 are the accel and decel signals to the motor itself, and pin 6 is key, obviously key on switched power, right? So the problem with this is that it doesn't tell you anything about voltages. So I need to go out and take a look and actually meter it out. What I'm hoping to find is that I have the correct signals on the connector and it's simply the motor that's blown. So I'm going to go out on the machine and get my multimeter out and see what I can find. So the only thing I got to do now is multimeter out my cable on the back. Took this panel off, just a perfect example of trying to find where wires go. You do so much disassembly that's a waste of time because there's no diagram of where the wires go. You've got to trace them and follow them. So right at the back of the engine is the this is the control unit that has either failed or I have the wiring issue that goes to it. I've pulled it out so that I could see the color coding on the wires. We got a female 6-pin connector here, and I'm going to be looking and checking the pin out on the male end. There are colors on this wire that I thought would be useful, but no, the schematic doesn't show it. It shows numbering on wires, which you can't see because the wires, of course, are in bad shape. So that diagram is supposed to represent the male end of the cable, which is down the back of here. I have it up against the back of the counterweight. So top right-hand corner, according to the diagram from the dealer, is pin 1, 2, 3, across to the left-hand side, 4, 5, 6. So top left is 6, top right is 1. According to this, I should have battery power on pin 1, permanently ground on pin 2. So top right-hand corner is supposed to be permanent 24 volts. Second pin is supposed to be ground. Well, guess what? No, it's not. Top right-hand pin is key switch power, 24 volts. Second one down is not ground. It in fact is nothing. The next one is nothing. The next one is nothing. And then the middle pin on the left-hand side is ground. So that's the kind of thing that can become very confusing unless you realize that what you've been given is backwards, right? So instead of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it in fact is the other way around, if you can imagine seeing it from the back, right? So I have key switch power in the top right-hand corner, which is where it's supposed to be, which is pin 6, not pin 1. I have accel and decel on 4 and 5, which are on the right-hand side. This diagram shows them as 2 and 3. And then on the left-hand side, I have feedback on pin 3. And then I have ground on pin 2, and I have nothing on pin 6, according to this diagram, which is supposed to be battery plus. So at first I thought I must have lost the permanent power supply until I spoke to somebody else, and pin 1, which is the top left, is not used in the earlier models. So my pin out is absolutely correct. This diagram is exactly right. I have all of the correct signals in the right places. So that simply means I need a new one of those. So I got the most useful information from Just Ask, which is a website that hooks you up with experts. I had 3 different discussions with 3 different people and found that 2 out of the 3 were completely worthless to me, but 1 was useful. That was partially useful. And between that and the books and the schematics, you have to just figure it out yourself. So good news is swing release is now working in both ECM and backup mode. And I have the correct signaling into the servo motor for the throttle control. And all I have to do now is buy a new one and plug it in, and away I go.